My name is Isla Monroe, and the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life turned out to be a carefully staged trap. My wedding was never about love, at least, not to my family. To them, it was a performance, a spectacle designed to remind me of my place, of where I came from, of how far they believed I didn't belong. For a while I thought they were simply distant, cold maybe. My mother had always been hard to impress, and my older sister Lila made every achievement of mine feel like an inconvenience to her spotlight. Still, I wanted to believe that deep down we were a family. When I got engaged to Carter, a kind, self-made architect with no interest in my family's wealth or legacy, I was ecstatic. He loved me for me, not for the Monroe name or the money that came with it. And for once I thought maybe, just maybe, they were happy for me too. They weren't. They said the right things, smiled in photos, toasted with champagne, sent out invitations that made it look like we were royalty. But behind the scenes, I started noticing things. Small at first. The florist I chose was suddenly unavailable. The venue I booked was mysteriously double booked, and my mother suggested her preferred estate instead. My bridal gown went missing from the boutique. And Lila? She somehow always ended up in meetings with the wedding planner I hired, even though she wasn't in the bridal party, but I brushed it off, because I wanted to believe they wouldn't go that far. That belief shattered the moment I walked into the reception and saw the slideshow. Not the one Carter and I had made together. This one was a tribute my family created, featuring baby pictures of me with mocking captions, awkward teenage photos, and a full section titled Isla's Most Dramatic Moments, complete with old therapy records and clips from my college years I never shared with anyone. The room went silent, and then someone laughed. My sister. And in that moment, standing in front of everyone I loved, humiliated by the people who claimed to love me back, I knew one thing. They thought this wedding was their final word, but they didn't realize it was just my beginning. I grew up being told I was too sensitive. That's what my family always said when they crossed the line. When my mother commented on my weight in front of my friends at 13, "She's a little soft, but she'll grow out of it." When Lila accidentally spilled wine on my acceptance letter to Brown because she didn't get in. When my father, ever silent and spineless, told me not everything's personal. But it always was. I was the second daughter, the afterthought. Lila was the star, the heir to the Monroe family legacy, the one my mother called our ticket to society. I was the shadow, the artsy one, the one who liked books and drew dresses in notebooks instead of going to debutante balls. So I stayed small. I got good at shrinking myself, at apologizing when I hadn't done anything wrong, at letting Lila take credit for things I designed or planned, at watching my mother beam at her while telling me, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" When I got into fashion school in New York, they barely blinked. I moved out on scholarship. I worked nights, built a portfolio, interned with names they couldn't pronounce. I worked my way into a respectable career designing wedding gowns. Not that they ever asked to see any of them. Then came Carter. He saw me, not the Monroe name, not Lila's shadow, not the sensitive one. Just me. He was steady, soft-spoken, thoughtful in a way I wasn't used to. When I showed him a sketch, he'd sit quietly with it like it deserved full attention. When I told him about my childhood, he didn't pity me. He listened. The night he proposed, I cried. Not because I was surprised, but because for once, something beautiful was happening to me, not in spite of my family, but beyond them. That should have been the beginning of something new. But my mother insisted we have the wedding at the Monroe estate for tradition. Lila volunteered to help with the planning so you don't get overwhelmed. Red flags, in hindsight. The vendors I booked canceled without reason. My bachelorette party was quietly scrapped and replaced with a family brunch. I was told not to include my closest friends in the bridal party because it would look unbalanced with Lila alone on the other side. It didn't feel like my wedding anymore. It felt like their show. Still, Carter was the one thing keeping me grounded. He'd hold my hand at family dinners while Lila gushed about her latest fundraiser. He'd send me silly texts during fittings. He never once wavered. So I pushed forward. I thought, if I just get through the ceremony, if I just smile through the photos, it'll all be worth it. Then came the reception, and the slideshow, and the silence. I stood there, frozen, humiliated in my own gown. The photos were real, but the captions were cruel, sarcastic digs, inside jokes I hadn't given them permission to share. Clips of me in therapy, moments from college taken out of context, voicemail rants I left in moments of frustration. I turned to Lila, smirking behind a champagne glass. And that's when I realized this wasn't about me marrying Carter. It was about them reminding me where I came from. Reminding me that I could never escape what they thought I was. Emotional, dramatic, embarrassing. I excused myself to the restroom. I stared at myself in the mirror, hands shaking, breath shallow. And then I heard the sound that broke me, laughter from the ballroom, my mother's. That was the moment I stopped crying, because I realized something no one had counted on. They had spent years underestimating me, but I had watched them, studied them, learned exactly how they moved. And now I had a new plan, because they may have made a mockery of my wedding, but I was about to make a masterpiece out of their downfall. I didn't go back into the ballroom. I walked out the side door barefoot, heels in hand, wedding dress dragging across gravel, and called Carter from behind the garden wall. His voice cracked with worry when he picked up. "Where are you?" Taking a breath, I said, "I need 10 minutes. Alone." He didn't ask why. He understood. That was the first moment I realized I hadn't lost everything, just the parts of my life that never belonged to me to begin with. For the next few weeks, I stayed quiet, didn't respond to my mother's smug, "Hope you're not too upset" text, ignored Lila's Instagram posts from the most elegant wedding of the year. I let them think I'd slink away like I always had, but this time I wasn't wounded. I was waiting. While they celebrated their petty victory, I was documenting everything, screen recording Lila's posts, downloading the full slideshow from the digital projector — they were careless enough to upload it to a shared drive — and collecting emails from guests who had been uncomfortable but too polite to speak up. And then there was the best part. I got a call from a woman named Juliet, a photographer who was hired to shoot candids during the reception. She had reached out to apologize. "I didn't realize what the slideshow was going to be," she said. "It felt wrong, and I thought, you should know I have everything on film." I blinked. "Everything?" She nodded. "The reactions, your sister laughing, your mother whispering to the planner, 'It'll teach her a little humility.' It's all there, audio and all." I felt something inside me click into place. My family hadn't just embarrassed me, they had filmed their own downfall. I got to work. Carter helped me pull together a quiet plan, something sharp, slow, and public. The wedding had already caught some social media attention, thanks to my family's influence. So we created a mini documentary using the footage Juliet provided and layered it with narration, my voice steady and clear, telling the real story behind the picture-perfect Monroe facade. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth, with their own footage as the supporting evidence. Then I submitted it to a mid-sized lifestyle channel that often covers wedding culture, family drama, and social facades. They loved it. They aired it. And within 72 hours, it had 2.8 million views. Comments flooded in. "This isn't a wedding. This is a coordinated humiliation." I've never seen a family use a reception as a weapon. Ela, if you read this, we see you. And we believe you. And suddenly, Lila and my mother weren't influencers anymore. They were villains, and the world had just been given front row seats. After the video went viral, everything changed, but not in the ways they expected. My mother tried to dismiss it. She called it clever editing when the local paper reached out for comment. Lila posted a polished reel 2 days later, twirling in a designer dress with a caption that read, "Some people thrive on attention. I prefer elegance." But their tone was brittle. Because behind the scenes, things were unraveling. My wedding hadn't just been a social event, it had been an industry opportunity. Monroe Events, a side brand my mother and sister were quietly trying to launch, was supposed to use the wedding as its debut portfolio, a gateway to booking real clients, leveraging our name for prestige. They had invited vendors, planners, influencers, and PR reps to that reception like it was a pitch deck in disguise. So when the world saw the truth, the bookings stopped. The sponsors ghosted them. The planner who'd collaborated with them posted a statement. I was unaware of the nature of the slideshow and regret my involvement in the event. I didn't stop there. Using the footage and emails I collected, I filed a complaint with the Board of Event Coordinators, citing defamation, breach of client trust, and emotional harm. Juliet, the photographer, submitted a statement confirming that my consent had never been requested for the public display of private materials. That was enough to suspend their license, pending review. Next, I filed a lawsuit, not for money, but for control of the Monroe family trust, something my mother had always dangled over our heads. I had documentation from Carter, who had overheard conversations, from Juliet, and from the shared digital drive where the slideshow had been uploaded, labeled Operation Humble Pie. I attached it all. The trust board was forced to review. Suddenly, my mother and Lila weren't just embarrassed, they were exposed. And in the meantime, Carter and I rebuilt our own narrative. We had a second wedding, quiet, intimate, at a coastal inn with 12 guests. No staged moments, no showy slideshows, just love, laughter, and a single toast where Carter's voice cracked as he said, "You taught me that rising doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it just has to be honest." That moment meant more than any ballroom full of strangers, because this time no one could take it from me. And the world? It was still watching. The official hearing for the Monroe Trust Review took place in a private boardroom at a law firm my mother used to boast about. Only the best handle our affairs. That day she didn't look proud. She looked cornered. Her lawyer spoke first, trying to minimize everything as family friction exaggerated by social media. He used words like creative interpretation and unfortunate misunderstandings. Lila sat beside him, lips tight, avoiding my gaze, her usual haughty confidence visibly cracking. Then it was my turn. I didn't dress for court. I dressed for my mother's memory. I wore the original gown I'd designed for my first wedding, the one they made disappear before the event, simple, elegant, stitched with hand-beaded lilies. The panel murmured when I walked in. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. I presented everything calmly. Emails confirming the digital slideshow was orchestrated behind my back. Video footage with audio, my mother whispering, "This'll knock her down a peg." The message Lila sent to the planner that read, "Let's make it unforgettable. She won't see it coming." And then I handed them a sealed letter, something I hadn't planned to use unless I had to. It was from my father, written 5 years ago, shortly before he passed. In it, he asked the board to ensure that the legacy and emotional trust of the Monroe estate be preserved in the hands of those who carry it with dignity. He named me. Not Lila, not my mother. Me! My voice didn't shake once. The room was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then one of the trustees said, almost too softly, "We believe Miss Monroe," she looked at me directly, "has made a compelling and well-supported case." The decision came by the end of the day. I was granted 70% control over the Monroe Family Trust. Not for the money, I didn't care about that, but for what it symbolized: ownership, autonomy, a future that no longer depended on approval from people who had spent their lives cutting me down. When I left the building, Carter was waiting by the curb with coffee and his crooked smile. I leaned into him, heart pounding, and he whispered, "They'll never touch you again." I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I finally remembered who I was. And I was never letting them write my story again. After the ruling, my mother and Lila went quiet. Not immediately. There were a few desperate attempts to save face. A hollow public statement from Lila about regretting how things unfolded, followed by a post featuring a black and white photo of us as kids with the caption, "Some bonds are tested, some break." People weren't buying it. The wedding documentary had already painted the truth too vividly. The footage, the audio, the calculated nature of the slideshow, it couldn't be undone by an aesthetic filter and a vaguely worded caption. Their event brand collapsed within a month. Their last 3 clients backed out, citing reputational concerns. One of them even called me privately, said she couldn't in good conscience support people who turned a daughter's wedding into performance humiliation. Juliet's photography business exploded, by the way. She was booked out for the next year, mostly by brides who'd seen the video and said, "You captured a woman's truth. That's who I want at my wedding." As for me, I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. Instead, I focused on building something real, with Carter, with our quiet little circle, with the life we were carving away from the toxicity I'd once thought was inevitable. We hosted Sunday dinners with our friends. I began teaching a course for young designers on bridal fashion and emotional storytelling through fabric. My dress, the one they tried to erase, now sat in a glass case in a boutique co-op titled "The One They Couldn't Rewrite." And yes, I kept control of the Monroe Trust, not for revenge, but for legacy. I redirected funds to support young creatives from difficult families. I launched a grant in my father's name for people who'd been silenced, manipulated, or controlled. Because I wasn't the only one, I knew that now. People started writing to me, messages, letters, emails. Some said, "Thank you for standing up to them." It gave me courage. Others said, "That video helped me leave my own toxic family." And for the first time, I understood the ripple effect of truth. One small act of resistance, done clearly, calmly, and publicly, can shake a whole system. Carter and I traveled to Florence for our first anniversary. No photographers, no performances, just the 2 of us on a rooftop, sharing wine and watching the city burn golden at sunset. He asked what I would have done if the wedding had gone smoothly, if they had just let me be happy that day. I thought for a second. Then I said, "Honestly, I might have let them stay in my life." He nodded, and we toasted, not to revenge, but to freedom. Sometimes I still think about the girl I was, standing frozen in her wedding dress, heart pounding, as a room full of people watched her life get picked apart on a screen. She wasn't weak. She was waking up. I used to believe love meant tolerance. That family meant swallowing disrespect with a smile and calling it grace. That if I could just be quiet enough, good enough, small enough, maybe I'd finally earn a seat at their table. But I know better now. You don't owe your dignity for their comfort. You don't have to shrink just to keep the peace. The most radical thing I ever did wasn't posting that video. It was refusing to go back inside that ballroom. That moment, when I walked barefoot through the garden with my gown dragging in the dirt, wasn't my breakdown. It was my rebirth. Now, the life I live is mine. No performances, no approval seeking, no waiting for someone else to validate my choices. My wedding may have started as a setup, but it became the launch point of a life no one else could steal. Carter and I built something from the rubble, not just a marriage, but a quiet kind of joy that doesn't need to be broadcast to be real. We host small dinners with mismatched chairs and candle wax dripping on the tablecloth. We laugh at nothing. We dance in the kitchen. And every time I feel a flicker of that old doubt, wondering if maybe I was too dramatic, too emotional, too much, I remember the messages. Hundreds of them. Strangers who said, "That was my mother too," or "My sister made me feel the same way," or "Thank you for showing that survival isn't always loud." There's a power in being seen, and I don't need their apology to feel whole, because I made peace on my own terms. The sign that used to hang outside the Monroe estate, etched with scripted gold letters, now sits in my closet, tucked behind a box of sketchbooks. I kept it not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do with a broken legacy is build something better from scratch. And never, ever let them rewrite your story again.